Listen, I'm all about outcomes, but I'm more about identity. You got to stop trying to measure it by why hasn't this outcome happened? Why hasn't this happened? You need to just get in love with this process. When you actually detach from that specific outcome, you can actually just enter like a flow state where you're vetting him too. Not that you've already chosen, but you're still trying to figure each other out. And the details of like the intricacies are really need to be harped and focused on. You really need to think about like, oh, I love doing that. He was like this, or he responded to the waiter like this. I like that, or I didn't like that, or there's all these little details of getting to know somebody without being overly analytical. But you should still be able to embrace this process of like, yeah, I want to get to know somebody. Not because I'm like measuring for a specific outcome with this specific person. That's number one. But number two is that it puts too much pressure on one specific person with one outcome. That's what happens when you start to put it all on one person, that you overanalyze every sense of their communication with you, even to that point. It took them 3.5 hours as opposed to 3 hours to get back to me. And then there's the overthinking, and then anxiety builds, and then you self-sabotage. A lot of girls will go through this process. This is kind of the wave, right? They go here, they really like the dude. All of a sudden they start getting over analytical because they're too attached to an outcome. And he didn't do this, didn't do this, didn't do this. Now I got to call it quits because I'd rather have full control over me ending it than have him end it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's guest episode. Today, I'm joined by Ben Hart. Ben is both an author and a dating strategist and coach, and I absolutely love Ben's content. He takes this very raw and real and authentic approach to dating. So today, as you may have guessed, we're going to talk about how to feel fulfilled in your dating. We're going to move past the BS, talk about what's really going on. Are they really interested? How to approach dating with intention and detachment. So we're going to dive into all of this. But first, we're also going to talk a little bit about Ben's book. It's called The Zero Mindset: Breaking the Social Rules That You've Been Taught to Build Your Vision and Business from Zero. So without further ado, Ben, welcome to the show.
I appreciate that. Very warm, welcoming introduction, Camille. Thank you very much. Flattered.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Why did you feel inspired to write this book? What was your motivation?
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2021, and this is at a point in my life. I was in the startup world for a while, and we merged with a media company, and I was trying to figure out where my next kind of like focus point was, and that was a moment of zero for myself, which is kind of what I'll describe in the book in a second. But I wrote this book because I was really interested in like high level personal development stuff, and I was trying to figure out a way that I can apply kind of my own theory to help people kind of redefine moments of zeros in their life. And maybe I was kind of subconsciously going through one at that time, but it's kind of like a point of recalibration and like recalibrating that moment of zero in people's lives, whether that's you're changing a career, you're entering the workforce, you end a relationship. These kind of moments are what everybody kind of typically tends to go through at some point. And it was kind of a bill about like breaking a lot of the social rules you've been ingrained with from day one about, what is like assessing risk or ideas of failure or social pressures, or these are kind of like unwritten social rules, not laws, that we kind of learn to be okay and abide by. And I kind of bring like a book to kind of question some of those so you can start a little more fresh and clean depending on what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's very relatable. Can you dive into some of these specific social rules, like some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, like, social and friend approval, kind of like just the inherent idea of risk taking for most people. As society as it advances, our idea of risk changes. And our idea of risk back in the day used to be very different than our idea of risk now. Risk is more now less associated with like a level of uncomfort. So it's important that I don't necessarily challenge what people can deem to be risky, but I challenge for them to put a perspective on what risk is for them. I talk about competition in there, and I talk about how competition is bad. Whereas most people would think it's very good, and it's kind of that's what capitalism is, but capitalism is kind of actually the opposite of competition. Most people would think it's very synonymous with competition, but most people who are in capitalism want to gain all the capital, and competition is anti-capital because you compete all the capital away. So I use that and I apply it to people directly in their own life. And I try to get them to create a different version of themselves and see themselves in a different way where they say, you know what, it's actually not that bad. I don't have it that bad. I can take risks. I can re-identify myself in a different box. So if I need to be, because I've kind of grown to know myself in a way, and so has everybody else. And now it's time for me to recalibrate. So that's kind of the way the book went.
Yeah, I love that. And the reason I wanted to start with his book and not just jump straight into dating is I love talking about all of these things on Fulfilled. I think in order to really live a fulfilling life and pursue your purpose and passion, you need to take risks, right? You need to start somewhere. And every single successful person speaks to those times where they started at zero, where they had to be their biggest supporter, where they had no idea what they were doing, where they were being cringe. And I think that's really awesome that you created a book around this. What was one big risk that you can think of from your personal life that you can share to inspire someone that wants to take a risk?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is also the thing that I'm kind of mentioning too, is like risk in general is kind of perceived in some extent, right? So like a risk for me may not be a risk for somebody else, and vice
Mm,
versa, right? I'll give you a quick example. So like me, I started a company, and my co-founder and I had two other co-founders, but one of my other co-founders and I went to college together, and we started about a year or two out of college. We created a company called Kinetic, and it was a fitness streaming company. Now, for me, when I went to college, I studied psychology, and I didn't have a perspective on what I wanted to do. I just knew that I like psych. I don't know where I'm going to land in the job market. I'm not really sure what my options are, but oh well. And my mother specific, because I was the first one to go to college, and yeah, definitely my immediate family, but I was the first one to kind of in the family to go to college. Or was it? It was more of like a we're grateful you're in college. It's great, you know. And I didn't have like a mold that people knew me for. It was kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to experiment with shit. I'm going to figure it out along the way. Ta ta. Whereas my co-founder he studied finance. He was looking to be an investment banker. He's been studying for that for most of his high school years, including his college years. Therefore, essentially what I'm trying to say is that his girlfriend knew him as that. His mother knew, and his parents knew him for that. His friends knew him for that. He's been ingrained with such a heavy identity. And to jump out of that identity box was a bigger risk for him than it was for me, even though one could say, oh, you take so much risk. The risk associated with social pressures and identity is arguably more than most other risks that we associate anything else with, like not having money. And like, of course, that comes along with the identity of doing something or being a quote unquote entrepreneur, is that of course, that's assumed you go years without money or sleeping on couches and this and that, which is what I did. But I would say the risks to do that probably was higher for somebody who's been ingrained in a specific identity for quite some time. And that risk for them to hop out of that box is a bigger risk for somebody like that than it is for somebody who's never had a box. So for me, I guess I can say, the biggest risk I took at the moment was because I didn't have a lot of expectation on what was to come next. I just did everything. I did everything broke, and I slept on couches for 6 years in New York. I didn't have a single lease that whole time. So I was just trying to figure that out. And one can see it as a risk, but for me, I was just having fun, you know?
absolutely. And I think that's why it's also really powerful that you address unlearning these social norms, right? Because if you start to unlearn the social norms and question them, right? Like maybe from your friend's perspective, like, why am I an investment banker? Like why do I resonate with that? Why do I relate to that? Why do I feel like I have to be this persona, and why do I identify with that? And I think once we unlearn those pressures from society, then that risk becomes a little bit easier and a little less intimidating, because if you don't feel like you have to identify a certain way, it feels less risky, right? Because what's really the worst that can happen? Like, oh, people are going to perceive you in a different way. Fantastic. This perception is probably more aligned with who I am, anyways. And
Yeah.
I think also just reframing that idea of like, oh my gosh, I'm sleeping on couches and I have no money and I don't really know what I'm doing. Maybe that's not a negative thing. Maybe that's a positive thing because you're on this like really awesome path. And I always tell myself too, the early stages of anything, like those are the stories that the successful people talk about with such gratitude, right? Like, wow, those were the good old days where I was just like couch hopping and, like just doing it myself. And
Mhm.
it's hard to see that in the moment, but reminding yourself, like, okay, if you are starting from zero, these are the glory days. This isn't a bad thing. This is me taking a risk that most people are scared to take.
Yeah, and then listen, 100%. I still think back to those days and think about that, right? And in the moment, it's always hard to see, and it's always going to be because in the moment you're still unsure of like if you're even going to do anything from this, right? So there's always that level of anxiety that's attached to it. In retrospect, it's always easy for me, and even myself, to look back and say, "Oh, I should have," I really love those moments, which I did, and they kind of molded. And part of it is because there's really no pressure on you at the moment. because you still have a lot to prove. And that's kind of like that's kind of the beautiful part of that trial and tribulations, because you still have so much to do there, where it's like the not pressure of trying to prove is just so amazing. And when you're already kind of at a place where you've proved something or you've done something, it's actually a little bit, it starts to get less fun,
Mm.
because you kind of have sets of expectations and things that you have been known to associate with. And, while other things get easier, other things also become harder. It's kind of the trade-off, right? Like the freedom of trying and not having expectations, or the shackle of people expecting because you've already done. That's a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think of this idea of risk too. You mentioned in the beginning, risk looks different to everyone, and something that's risky to one person might not be risky to another person. Like maybe leaving a 9 to 5, like that would be a big risk for someone starting a side hustle, let's say. But for you, that wouldn't be a risk or even like applicable to you. So I think it's also important to consider like the personalization of risks, both when it comes to identity and maybe where you are in that timeline and journey.
Totally. Or like, again, like perspective is one thing, and like their mindset, which is molded by like how they grew up and where they were born, mostly probably more based out of luck than anything else. And I mean, you could have been born in the bottom of the Congo, and your risks would be very different, is my point,
Mm.
right? So depending on where you're born and time frame which you're born, you see risks very differently. And I think when you have so much access at your fingertips, risk becomes more about uncomfort. And when you don't have access like that, risk is a little bit more survival based. So I think just kind of the spectrum of survival, the comfort, depending on time and frame of where you are.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me.
So I know I got too into this book because this is my bread and butter and I love
Yeah,
talking about this, but congratulations on the book. If anyone
yeah, I
listening wants to
appreciate it.
listen, I will link that in the show notes. So let's talk about fulfilling dating. So this is
Yeah.
actually something I'm really curious about. Can you share how you went from writing a self-improvement book to being a dating coach and doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I did content on the whole like personal development, self-improvement thing for a number of years. And, I had some traction. I was pitching a lot and doing some interesting stuff in there. And I used the book as like a gateway to open up other opportunities, which was fine. But, you know, dating is one of those things where it just came really more natural to me in terms of like how I talk and what I'm interested in. So like I'd find myself at coffee shops or bars or anywhere else, and like conversations I'd listen to conversations around, and most of the conversations that had to do with like, oh my God, then he did this, girl, and then he did this. I'd just be really attuned to, really like listen. I'd be like, oh, it's so interesting. And every time I would speak to somebody, guy or girl, and they would start talking about their work, at some point, for some reason, the conversation would always start to navigate to like their personal relationships or like their dating. Like it's like this
Yeah.
weird thing that's so universal. And I found myself like, while I was always very interested in like the details, I never wanted to be that guy. That was the identity box I was kind of running from. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that guy. That's not what I even know myself for. Never mind what other people know
Mm.
me for. But I found myself having these conversations a lot, and I found myself kind of just consuming things that I kind of liked and I didn't like, and also like I found myself just kind of like really interested in the topic.
Mm.
So I started to create my own, like, and I would always have these conversations with my friends. Just I was like, you know what, fuck it, like, let me just try a playground. Let me try a playground. That playground for me was TikTok at the time. So when I tried TikTok, I said, I didn't think of it as like a whole nother thing. I thought of it as like, okay, there's personal development, which you can see in a variety of different capacities. In one life, it's a very gray area, and it's hard to apply, broad gray brushstrokes onto like specific problems. That was the one thing I noticed about when you talk about big gray problems. But dating specifically, I associated with being like a carved out niche of personal development. So a lot of the framework and how I speak about dating is kind of like stems from here a little bit. So I just kind of like niched it down. Let me talk about dating, and then now let me niche it again. Let me talk to women about dating. So it
Mhm.
was kind of like I created like one video on TikTok, or maybe it was one or two, and I noticed that my views went from like 400 that I was doing before to like 15,000, 20,000. So they started to jump a little bit. So once I noticed that, I kind of just quadrupled down, and I did like 5 or 6 videos a day for a whole year. And I just kept boom, boom on TikTok, and specifically on TikTok, because again, go back to what I was saying before, like I didn't have an identity box to run from. So it's kind of like, it was a playground where like nobody knew me. And like, if nobody knows you there, you kind of feel like you can be who you want to be, right? Part of the reason why people come to New York, is that you don't have this like sets of rules and expectations based on something that everybody knows you for. So you can come here. That's why I see people come here and like, they're like a whole different version of themselves, Because sometimes they come here and they want to be a version of themselves they couldn't have been where they grew up. So they come here and it's like, well, I want to be this person now. And I can be because nobody gives a shit. That's kind of how I felt about TikTok. They didn't know me and let me just do the shit that I like to talk about.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things too. It's like, I knew it was one of those things for me that I really enjoyed talking about because, there's some things that kind of flow effortlessly for people. And there's other things where they try really hard and they still can only get here. Where these one of those things where I don't try as hard and it's like more flowy. And I've noticed a lot of benefit from that.
Yeah.
Like it's been like more exponential growth for myself because it's just kind of like effortless in a way. Like I just love talking. Like you can give me a topic, I'll be like, all right, this is what I think about this. And I kind of go on like a subconscious rant.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it started. And that's kind of how it continues to happen. So like I enjoy it because it's a little more easy for me than maybe some of the shit I used to do in the past, which I'd be like, okay, I have to think of my 3 points I want to make. And so I wouldn't be able to crank out video as much because I didn't have like the flow state of like experience or knowledge or, or data from that.
Yeah. There's so much here. So this kind of relates to your book too, right? Because you just said you had to detach from your old identity, which is hard to do. But what came to mind when you were sharing your stories? Okay, if you accept that this is what you actually enjoy talking about and this is what you want to do, if anyone's still trying to put you in another box, like who cares? It's just coming back to that mindset of like not caring what other people think and doing what works for you. Like you felt that resistance in the beginning of like, ooh, do I want to speak to women about dating? Is that kind of like weird? That wasn't what I was doing before. What are people going to think? But clearly this is like something that comes so easily to you and you feel flow and you have these like really awesome insights that have helped so many people. And if you were clinging to your past identity and continuing through that resistance and not going with, what actually felt in flow and what actually aligned with you, you would just continue to feel resistance. You wouldn't have seen that growth and you wouldn't be helping all the people that you're helping now. It's something I like to talk to about, like trusting your intuition, which it sounds like you did.
Yeah, no, it's totally too, right? And by the way, let's not mistake it too. Like if I didn't have any success, even on the flow state of with it, like if I didn't feel like it was people receiving it well, I maybe would have been like, nah, maybe this isn't it for me, right? So there is part of that. It's like a desire to be like validated around specific ideas. And I had that very early on. No, I don't have it as much anymore, but of course, because I'm kind of already knee deep in a niche, but like at the beginning, that's a difficult challenge to get out of when you know yourself for something. And that's why, even for me, right? Like I built most of my audience on TikTok. That kind of goes back to my point is that like, when I was going on there, it's part of the reason I felt that freedom on there is because nobody cared or knew from what I did before. Whereas it took me like a year to put that stuff on Instagram because I've had people I've worked with in the past, I have family on there and they're not used to that conversation from me. And that was like, I always kind of had to get acceptance of that over here before I felt enough confidence to put it to a place where everybody knew. You start to care less about what people think, right? And I'm not naive. Like I get people always care about what people think, even if they like to say they don't. They always do to some degree. There's always some kind of level, right? And I did, but it took me a while to get to that point where I started to care a lot less.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. When I started the podcast, I was too scared to even post on social media at all. And then I was like, okay, Camille, you're stupid if you think that you can grow a podcast without posting on social media. There's something about Instagram that just does feel a bit more personal. Like your friends follow you on Instagram and TikTok. There is that kind of barrier where like, it's just a bunch of strangers seeing your videos and there's less risk there, or it feels that way. But as you said, the more that you post and builds that muscle of like, actually, I don't really give a shit what other people think. And the people that are going to judge me, they're just projecting their own insecurities and probably wish that they're doing what I'm doing,
100%. And it might take a while for people to get there, but I think the part of it that helps people get there is to go to places where you don't have an identity box that you've been in for a while, because it feels a little safer. It's like an initial step if you have a problem doing it with people who already know you for things, because of course you're afraid of being like, well, they're going to like it. Are they going to judge me? How does this come off to Aunt Susie? Nobody cares really in reality, but that's always a thing. And also another good thing is like, realize that like, you're not creating content for them. And that's also another thing too, is you have to like, I'm not creating content for my mother or my family or my ex business partner or anybody else. It's specific for people who feel like they can benefit from it. And sometimes I have to get that back in my head and remind myself, this isn't even for them. Why do I even think about them? This has nothing to do with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I
So
like I like that you used the term too earlier, like it's your playground. Like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
experimenting. It's trial and error. You're not going to land it on the first try, and it's not going to feel comfortable on the first try. It's going to feel cringy, and you're going to navigate figuring it out for a while. But every video you post, you get a little bit better. You figure out what works, what doesn't, and it's a journey. And I think every single creator can resonate to that.
totally,
So, the
totally.
reason why you have grown so much on social media is because of your very helpful, raw, and relatable dating advice. So, my first question for you: why is it important to bring a certain energy to dating? And what is that energy?
I think it depends on what you want, but I would argue
Mm,
that most people will, if they're actually in dating, are looking for somebody to share parts of their life with. But we have to understand that we kind of attract what we are, and that's an important kind of thesis to start living your dating by. And if you are walking around a little more hurt and bitter about all these experiences you have in dating, how could you think that you would attract somebody who's not in that light and who's in a light of like optimism and doing that? Do you think that they would naturally be attracted to somebody who's more pessimistic about life? Probably not. First off, I think it's important to say, like, what do I want? And
mm,
that's just the main frame, right? Like, there's a framework of thinking that I like to think about, right? Just what do you want? I don't really care what the outcome is. And typically, when I ask that question, most people go to like qualities in a person, which is fair. You can use that list, but like, what do you want as like an outcome? Like, most people, I would argue, are looking for like a relationship, or maybe they want to get married one day, or maybe they want a family. Like, these are kind of like outcomes that are kind of like, okay, measurable outcome, measurable outcome, measurable outcome. Or you're somebody saying, hey, I don't want any of it. I just want to date around and meet great people and enjoy myself. Fantastic. But whatever that is that you want, there's like outcome and then there's identity. And then you kind
mm,
of have to like become whatever the outcome is, And I use the example all the time of like, you want to get into Harvard, you got to become Harvard student first. You have to reverse that. A lot of people think that once I meet the right, then it happened. But like, you can't do that because you won't meet the right, because you're not it to meet the right? You kind of have to be it to get it. And that's the mentality of her. So you have outcome and you have identity. Now it's the question of like, who do I need to become? With this kind of outcome, what kind of identity is required for that kind of outcome? And by the way, we can do this in every capacity in our life. It's just difficult. And I get that. It's difficult from a dating perspective because people don't think of dating in this like strategic thought process. They think of it as like magic, and they think of it as like Aladdin and like, the magic should like enter the air and like love should conquer all. But sadly enough, with the way dating has changed over the last decade and a half, it's very difficult for that to take place because of analysis paralysis, dating apps and hookup culture and, social media, and just go span beyond, right? Where we get our attention from. And it's confusing a lot of people.
mm. Can you share a little bit more about that? What's so confusing about how dating has changed?
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple things. Number one is the level of perceived options that one has is always kind of like a grass is always potentially greener, which is very difficult to where it seems like you might be settling for something and you always think that you could do better, right? So you have a selection of 102 gray shirts, different types of grays, all types of grays, or you have three to choose from. And this is how it's changed drastically over the number of decades, which is we used to swim in ponds and now we're all swimming in the ocean. And it's very difficult when everybody's swimming in the ocean to make a decision. People have a difficult time making decisions. And when you
Mm,
have all these decisions, it's very easy to look at one decision out of potentially millions in front of you and find the red flag. So it makes it really hard to commit to something.
uh,
So that's a big one. That's one of the biggest ones on why dating has gotten so difficult. And then second part is, just general perceived access to attention and human beings. And it's kind of paralyzed our actual social skills out in the real world. Like, I speak to people, and women specifically, but I speak to people all the time who are afraid to look at guys that they have an interest in, that they actually have an interest in. They're not afraid to look at guys that they don't have an interest in. They're only afraid to look at the guys that they kind of think is cute or like have an interest in. Weird phenomenon. I know, but it is true.
and why is that?
Because they're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of he's not
Uh,
going to look back, and they're afraid of what that's going to do to their ego, and will they be able to carry themselves for next week. Whereas
mm,
I think this is an interesting dynamic, right? Because guys are a little bit more accustomed to this kind of rejection. It's just kind of expected with their existence, and they know that they have like for guys it's about shooting shots. For women, it's about choosing the shots that are shot at you. And that's just like a different mentality. And so guys are a little bit more accustomed to being like, okay. Whereas like even the perceived level of rejection or failure from most women are enough to get them to not do it. Like
Mhm.
even like I have to convince, but just for context, I have like a live TikTok show Sunday or Monday through Thursday now, 4 times a week. I've been doing it for over a year, and it's a call-in show. But I also have one-on-ones that people always schedule with me, and I have to convince women on how to do eye contact. And I have to also have to convince them that it's not a failure if he doesn't act on your eye contact. It's, the story attached is, well, I need to be romantic and flirt. When in reality, the story is I just need to be a nice person. It's just interacting with people.
Mm.
And we've kind of overcomplicated it to where it's like everything is overanalyzed and like, what happened? Oh my God, he didn't even look at me. I'm never doing that again. It's like the idea of failure in people's heads is like paralyzing. So that's
Yeah.
another tragic issue.
Yeah. No, this idea of rejection, is fear of rejection, is something I want to talk about a little bit, because as a female, like, I get that. I don't think anyone handles rejection well, but I would agree with what you said, that it's definitely more of a fear for women. Me, I don't really know why. You would know more. So do you think that this fear of rejection actually is hurting them instead of helping them? Like, the woman, for example, won't make eye contact with that guy that she thinks is cute, but wouldn't that really be like preventing her from potentially talking to him then? Like, it's really holding you back if you're letting that fear of rejection prevent you from making a move.
Yeah, of course, it's ruining their lives. Like their lives are being ruined. I'm not even exaggerating, like ruined. Like until
Mm.
they start making decisions, being like, you know what? Forget about dating for the moment. Just even just interacting with human beings. Like that's kind of how far it's gotten. The interacting with other human beings of the opposite makes you very fearful. And it comes back to this idea of rejection. So it's paralyzing for a lot of them. And it doesn't yield them any good results. And I think that they know that. But part of the problem is that, like, someone asked me in the podcast, they said, what is like the biggest problem with dating? What a really big question to ask. But from my perspective only, I think it's the overconsumption of online content. I think you're too, like, if you would just cut off everything and just step outside, you'd just be so much better off.
Yeah.
It's just that you're so overwhelmed with information and you're so injected with everything that it's hard for you to even think on your own without being influenced by every other person talking about all this experience and that experience, what you shouldn't do, what you shouldn't do, what you this. And I even say, even if that takes you not listening to me, okay, don't listen to anything then. Just get outside and live your life. You'll be so much better off. Am I a little biased? Do I think you should listen to me a little bit more? Kind of. Only reason is because only reason is, fair enough, is that I don't say information. I don't give content for your best interest. I give content from a general relationship best interest and like what's best for you and what you want, not what's best for you to make you feel most comfortable or make you feel less putting your neck on the line. That's not really the place I look at it from. So I look at it from like what's going to kind of build and aid in the result getting into the things you want, regardless of not necessarily what's best for you to keep you safe.
Yeah. Yeah. No sugarcoating. And again, that's why I love the content and work that you do. I really like that you brought up this idea that the online element of dating and the having too many decisions at your fingertips is actually making dating really hard. Like, all these apps are promoting easy dating. You don't even have to like leave your apartment, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's taken away the whole point of dating, which is like meeting people in the wild. I vent about this to my friends all the time. Like, out in bars, guys rarely approach females nearly as much. And
Mhm.
I would love your take on this. It's just something I've personally noticed. Like, I'm someone who is more confident and not afraid to like go up and talk to a guy or like make the eye contact even. Like, that's a crazy fact to me. And I also I believe that we should unlearn the idea that like a guy needs to approach the girl. I actually have been told by guy friends that like they actually find it attractive if the female has the confidence to like go up to the guy. So I've taken that to heart and I do it myself. But it's frustrating because like if I am in a bar and giving like a guy eye contact or like making a cute comment to him or something, like they're still like being shy, Why are men less hesitant? Why are men, excuse me, more hesitant to approach girls in person now?
Yeah, I think a variety of reasons. So I won't proclaim this to one reason, right? But there's probably a lot of different reasons. There's probably a lot of reasons on the level of comfort that men have today, just in general. That goes down to the details of the type of jobs they do. Like you have to think about it, like, even lower testosterone rates. Like there's a variety of factors that can go into like why maybe they're less fair enough. But the one that I think maybe gets talked a little bit about less is these guys are consuming similar content that you are too online, right? So like your feed is maybe not the same, but they're experiencing that too. And they also see that when guys start taking risks and girls don't like it, or he's a creep, or he was looking at me too long, or his Hinge profile, and they start scrolling down the guy's Hinge profile and like calling him out. They're like, I'm not doing that. Like, it's almost like the hunt isn't even worth it for them. Now, does that mean that all girls like that? Of course it doesn't. But it doesn't even matter in their mind, because in their head, they're like, is it even worth it for her to like go blast me off in a group chat and call me like some creep, or look at me like I'm some weirdo because I wanted to like say hi to her and talk to her? Now, in different places, specifically in like the US, is very different. Like if you're in New York, most people, and I would also argue actually most girls, are just like this. And they don't want to be bothered until they want to be bothered. But they don't want to be bothered until they want it. Okay. But if you go in maybe places in the South and you're just like walk around and you say, hi, and a girl says, hey, how are you? Very different. Here, that never happens. And I talk to guys all the time. Like, girls are afraid to look up. They don't want to be bothered by anybody. And the content in the cycle that the guys see is exactly that. It tells them, just leave me the fuck alone. And they're going to leave you alone. So I think it's a combination of things. But I do think that this one is less discussed because they just want to, girls will be like, well, that's an excuse. No, it's really just less desirable too, because of the outcome, that they're like, well, why would I do that now? Doesn't seem like, do you have a brother?
Yeah.
Older, younger?
Older.
Does he date?
He's getting married, but he had to date in order to get married. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it's always interesting to hear girls that have brothers, because they have a slightly different perspective. They talk to them at least to some degree, and they hear different issues. Whereas a lot of girls that are not around men at all, or don't have any brothers, really don't see it at all. They're like, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I hear more of a deal from my guy friends, because I just get curious. Like, I'll share something from my personal life with them, and then they're like, oh, like, it was just this XYZ. They say it so quickly because I just don't live in the guy brain. And that's why earlier I was also like, why do men not approach women in the wild now? But you're 100% right. I just wasn't thinking about it from the other perspective, because I'm a woman interested in men, but men probably see it the same way. Like, everyone's really just glued to their phone now, and no one's really like talking to people as much in the wild. And it makes it really hard to meet people in person. And I think it just draws people more to the apps.
Yeah. And it's like, I know girls who get approached by guys and like literally blow the whole opportunity, because like their natural, like, oh my God, I don't know what to say, I'm just going to walk away. Even though I was kind of interested in them, just like totally blew. And that's what I mean. Like, you kind of like, the social skills have been like cut. Like, it's almost like when you don't have to use them as much, you tend to lose things you can't use. Right. And like when all your social skills are like sending emojis or group chats or social media to some extent, you lose the real world, like distance management, like eye contact. Everything becomes awkward because you're not used to doing it,
Yeah. So what are some of the hidden signs for if a guy is interested in a girl versus if he's not?
Yeah. So I see this is I can give you the simple answer, but I also want to give you like a more complex one too, because my social media is always like, I dumb everything down and make it super simple and black and white and right, wrong, yes, no,
Yeah.
But and it is important to do that sometimes, but not all the time. You need context, which is like, it's not that guys are not interested if they don't do specific things. It's just that depending on what phase of life you're in, right? And depending on what it is you want. Like some guys, depending on where they're at, like in big cities, like in their 20s, most guys are not going to be interested in commitment. Just like a lot of girls aren't either. Some are, but a lot just they move to New York, like for example, right? Any big city. You move to New York and you want to advance your professional or your personal ambition or career. And that's your focus. And along the way, you like to meet some great people and have some fun.
Yeah.
The difference is that there becomes a time where most girls that start to switch on a little bit sooner than most men do, whereas they say, all right, well, now I'm ready. And their counterparts at that age were like, well, I'm not fully that ready yet, because it took me a little bit longer to get the things that make me a little bit more attractive to the opposite. So there's this weird dynamic that goes on there. So I will say that it depends on the phase of life they're in, on what interest means to you. So we have to define, like, what does interested mean? Like, so is this for somebody who's looking for like a relationship or commitment or moving forward on the line? And if that's the case, if that's the bar stand that you're measuring from, then you can only measure that with two categories. Number one, does he take you out consistently? And taking you out consistently requires a consistent level of communication, openness, but like, does he take you out? Like, this is really that simple. That's the basic line. If he doesn't take you out, it's just not it. I don't care how much he texts you or anything, FaceTimes you or likes your profile or a picture you posted. If it doesn't take you out, there is nothing to talk about. So And then at some point, does he commit, or is he showing committable behaviors, right? And that leads to commitment. So take you out, commitment. That's how you know if a guy's interested, right? Those are the fundamentals of interest. There's other levels of interest, just to be clear. Like, yes, of course, he might be interested in you, but the only thing you care about because of what it is you're looking for, or is he consistent with taking you out, and does it lead to commitment because of what you're looking for, right? That now he might be interested in you to like, oh, I like her, she's great, we like to hang out, but could you see her as your wife? And he'll be like, no, I don't think so, but I enjoy my time. He's still interested in you, but because it's not what it is that you're looking for, he's not interested enough. It's not that kind of interest, right? There's like a spectrum of interest, but the only things you really need to care about if you're somebody who wants an actual committed relationship are, does he take you out, and is there commitment on the way?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to I try to oversimplify it, because what happens is we tend to kind of like, as time goes on, we tend to like overcomplicate early stage dating. And then we insert like, well, we're exclusively seeing each other, but we're not in a relationship. So there's like all these layers that make it more complex than maybe it has to be. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have so many thoughts. They might not be ready for commitment, and that might be something that you want. Like, let's say the girl wants it and the guy's like, I'm not there yet, but I'm interested in her. I thought this was a really important distinction, because I think in the girl brain, if a guy pulls away or ends things, the girl will immediately take it personally, right? Like, oh, he just doesn't like me, or he just isn't interested in me, and make it this big thing. But maybe the reality, if you take a step back, is like, you were here wanting a relationship and wanting to settle down, and he just wasn't. You know, maybe we don't have to overcomplicate it. So do you notice that with a lot of your clients and people that you speak with, that like maybe it gets to a point where the guy just realizes like, oh, she might want to move forward and want a relationship, and I just like don't want that?
Yeah, that happens all the time, right? And it's not always about what the girl did or what she didn't do. It might just be who she is and who he is. And he couldn't say why. And number one, yeah, he couldn't see him getting down on one knee for her, right? And that's just, I'm oversimplifying that too, but that's essentially it. It's like, I like her, but I don't want to drag this on that long. I don't want to commit to her in that sense. Or number two, which is they kind of overlap, which would be like, I'm just not in that place. I don't want a commitment at the moment. I'm not ready. And that when a guy is kind of not ready for whatever reason that is, it's a variety of things he's not ready for. But number one is he doesn't feel like he's in a secure enough place to be able to have a commitment and focus on a relationship, because he still doesn't have the resources or the network or the experience or the confidence or whatever it is that makes him an available rock inside of a relationship. And some guys that comes earlier and some guys that comes later, right? But he knows that a lot of girls, especially in like modern bigger cities, he understands what they're looking for in some sense. And listen, the ones that you start relationships with earlier on, those are great. But when you enter big city markets like this, it's hard because people tend to wait later, and that creates a lot of complication for a variety of different reasons, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy and helpful perspective, because it makes it less personal, right? Like, maybe that guy's being responsible by not settling down because he has these goals. Maybe it's like really not about you at all, you know? And hopefully that helps ease a lot of women's minds that are listening. I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
What is this idea of dating detached, and why is that important and effective?
Especially, I think when we talk about dating detached, we that's really early stage dating, like, first month dating. I'm just going to put that out, like first month dating, even first two at sometimes, right? Just depending on how frequent you see this person. But the reality is, detachment in itself is about not expecting a specific outcome to happen, because when you focus on that outcome too much, listen, I'm all about outcomes, but I'm more about identity. And you got to stop trying to measure it by, why hasn't this outcome happened? Why hasn't this happened? You need to just get in love with this process of getting to know, because a lot of women forget that what happens is they tend to choose the guys, right? So hypothetically, if 10 guys approach her, she'll choose one. And that one guy that she chose because she neglected 10, that one guy that she chose, she's kind of already in some degree chose him, as they can keep going on dates to some degree. Now, yeah, she could see other guys. Of course she could. But when you put an expectation of like outcome specifically, like from a relationship standpoint, when that's too much in your head when you actually detach from that specific outcome, you can actually just enter like a flow state where you're vetting him too. Not that you've already chosen, but you're still trying to figure each other out. And there's the details of like the intricacies really need to be harped and focused on. You really need to think about like, oh, I love doing that. he was like this, or he responded to the waiter like this. I like that, or I didn't like that. Or there's all these little details of getting to know somebody without being overly analytical. But you should still be able to embrace this process of like, yeah, I want to get to know somebody. Not because I'm like measuring for a specific outcome with this specific person. That's number one. But number two is that it puts too much pressure on one specific person with one outcome. So you tend to say, well, what did they do? It took them 3.5 hours as opposed to 3 hours to get back to me. That's what happens when you start to put it all on one person, that you overanalyze every sense of their communication with you, even to that point. And then there's the overthinking, and then anxiety builds, and then you self-sabotage. A lot of girls will go through this process. This is kind of the wave, right? They go here, they really like the dude. All of a sudden they start getting over analytical because they're too attached to an outcome. And he didn't do this, didn't do this, didn't do this. Now I got to call it quits because I'd rather have full control over me ending it than have him end it. So let me cut the cord, because I'd rather at least say if it doesn't end, it didn't end because of me.
Yeah.
So I see this pattern a lot.
Yeah. I love this idea because I think what detaching from that outcome also does is it makes you more present to enjoy the actual process, right? I think, as you mentioned, when you're so focused on getting to that certain point and having tunnel vision on them acting a certain way and fitting with that perfect person in your mind, you miss either maybe like red flags or green flags along the way because you are almost like paying attention to the things you just want to pay attention to. So I think that's
Right.
super helpful.
Yeah. And like, listen, like, right, like anybody who watches sports, like, yeah, you want to win the game. But if you're not obsessed with like every down or like every quarter and like this step and that step and the dribbles, if you're not like really interested in the details, there's no winning the game. There's no game to win. Matter of fact, you kind of have to golf yourself and like, yeah, there's an art to like getting to know somebody and like, yes, he picked me up and I really like that. And like, I touched his arm and we really like that. And we enjoy each other's company. And, you know, he asked me on 2 dates last week and one of them was this. And like, you just, as opposed to thinking like, well, when is the commitment gonna happen? Like, forget about the fucking commitment. Like the commitment's never going to happen at this point.
Yeah.
You're done. You really need to be focusing on like embracing these things,
Yeah.
these beautiful moments. And then as you're vetting, and then you can get to the point where you say, okay, well, I actually really like where this is going. And then you can get to the point of the decision of commitment.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's so important to highlight because I definitely have
Nice.
I've done this where I get way too excited after like a date or two, right? I'm like, wow, they were so great, blah, blah, blah. And it's really just like, no, you just had like a good date or two. Like you literally don't even know that person yet. But when you start to develop this idea of who you want someone to be or who you think someone is in your head, you almost don't see them exactly for who they are and maybe start to like justify things or, you know, you just aren't actually present to get to know them as they are. And you might end up in a relationship that isn't aligned if you do that too soon. I think
Totally.
it's a really helpful concept.
Totally. And like it takes the pressure off. Like you were saying earlier, right? Like you made the point of like, you don't want to have all this built up pressure of like any specific, like real big outcome. You want to enjoy the moment. And it's really hard for a lot of women to enjoy that moment. And I can get that. But if you don't really get to the chance of like enjoying these moments, it's probably not going to happen because he's, again, you know, right? Like most women rely on men from a commitment standpoint. And they don't like to say that because if they say that, they've given up their leverage and power in their head, right? So, but they don't want to say that. But I would tell you,
Don't reveal our secret.
Yeah, I would tell you. I have these shows. I talk to maybe around, I'm no joke, maybe around 100 women a week.
Wow.
And I would tell you, just because I have the call-in show and I get like 20 call-in nights, right? So like,
you're not going on 100 dates a week, Ben?
no, but like they'll call in, right? And they'll be like, I haven't had a single guy that's been talking to a girl for 2 months call in and be like, so what's the deal? Like, she's not committing to me. Like, what, or is she, how does she feel about commitment? Like, none of them are concerned about that.
Yeah.
Their concern is getting to date 1. And women's concern is typically, well, what happens after, you know, the date 3, 4, 5 and everything else? Like, how does he feel? Like, what does this mean? I haven't heard from him in 26.5 hours, or whatever it is. There's all these details, intricacies that come past once they've chosen the guy in their head.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. Final question for you, ending on a positive note here. If anyone listening is feeling a bit pessimistic in dating right now, what advice and inspiration do you have for them?
There's a couple of things, I guess. Number one is you are what you attract. So if you are feeling a little pessimistic, everybody can understand the idea of pessimism when you've had a couple of bad experiences. I talk about momentum a lot. So if you've had a couple of bad experiences, you might need a recalibration. And because sometimes pessimism comes from like, okay, I've had this, and this bad happen to me. Okay, that happens to everybody. As long as you understand that this is kind of like a part of the game, now you have to recalibrate and you need to start a little bit different and build momentum in a different way. And that momentum could be like, again, like even the little small things of like real world interaction of just like putting the phone down for a couple minutes and not consuming on what you should and shouldn't do or what advice your friends are going to give to you. But just put yourself in position to like even just look in a guy's direction or even just get next to him at some point. You don't have to do anything. Just the small little pieces of momentum all of a sudden create this like, we live in this like world online that is kind of like really difficult to apply to the real world because of all the stuff we tend to hear is not good. It's always things that went wrong or somebody effed somebody over. This dude did this, and you don't really hear like the good things about it. So I think that if pessimism is occurring, you might need a recalibration in terms of how you're dealing with things. And you might need to reassess a little bit about who you are. And I talk a lot about self-awareness and understanding who you are out here and how to kind of put out to the world what it is you're looking for. And I think sometimes people need to rethink that process. And because they might be showing up in a way that's attracting the thing that's creating pessimism for them.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Ben, this is really awesome. Thank you so much. Where can listeners find you if they want more of you?
Well, I appreciate that, Camille. Benny Inc., BENNYINC on Instagram and TikTok.
Awesome. That'll be linked below, everyone. Thanks so much, Ben.
Appreciate you, Camille.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to press follow or subscribe wherever you are listening for more realistic and relatable shifts to live a more fulfilling life. And I'll see you all again soon.